man. Welcome to the introduction. Well, kind of an introduction for episode 124.5. This is the remaining subscriber questions from 124. And as it turned out, we got so many submissions that we ended up with 4 hours in total. So this is the second 2 hours, first hour running on YouTube, full show running on crow777radio.com. But before we jump in to subscriber-based questions, I would also like to mention that Sunday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York time, I have a new live radio show on Truth Frequency Radio called Crow 777 Live. It's got a live chat. It's interactive. We try to base a lot of the show on input from people in the chat room, so I hope to see you all there. Anyhow, let's jump in with Jason Lindgren and get through, this is going to be the first hour, but again, the second hour is running on crow777radio.com. So let's jump in, man. Cheers. All right, man. Welcome, everybody, back to part 2 of episode 124. This will be listed as 124.5. This is the remaining QA questions submitted by subscribers. As a reminder for everybody, this Sunday night, probably the day after this post, or September 9, at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York time, Jason and I will be doing Crow 777 Live on TFR, which is known as Truth Frequency Radio. We hope to see a number of you there. It will be live. There is a live chat. You can sign up for free to be involved in that chat. But I guess I'll welcome Jason.
Oh, hello.
So we're going to open up with a thing that I got last night, an email that I got last night. And the reason I want to do this is because I have received many emails of people who on the tail of the law series we did have endeavored to implement these ideas. It takes a brave individual to stand tall and do these things. And I will preface before Jason reads the email from a follower, from a subscriber that has tried to implement these ideas, that it proves outright that there is a there. They are not being thrown out. They are not being jailed. An attempt is being made to railroad them. Whenever you are being railroaded, it means you have a path that is being blocked or attempting to be blocked. Anyhow, go ahead, Jason. And as you read through, I think I scrubbed identity pretty well out. So the name John Doe will stand for the actual true name of the person. And when the name changes, Junior will be added. Go ahead, Jason.
Hi, Crow. I was charged in North Carolina with Schedule 6 CS, simple possession, marijuana, and paraphernalia. The story about how this charge originated is much more interesting, and I'll be glad to share it with you if you like. But for now, this is a charge that carries no incarceration. For the most part, it is a fine and/or a community service. As such, I thought it might be worth trying some of these techniques from Alphonse and Stephen Miller. I reached out to Alphonse through email and showed him a rough draft using his short little statement. In response, he sent me a very detailed template, 5 pages long. This caught me as odd, for his solution on the show was quite simple. I read all comments in that show several times and listened to that show as well as Miller's show many times. Much of what Miller stated I have memorized, and regardless of my outcome, there does seem to be something there that gives those in supposed authority reason to pause. They lift eyebrows and show their psychopathy just as he stated. The template sent to me by Alphonse seems to sound good, and I have verified most of the case law and other laws presented in it. I crammed like crazy for the last 2 weeks, reading North Carolina statutes, codes, court procedure process, Administrative Procedures Act, etc. Bloody boring as hell. I watched countless YouTube videos of people in court, attorneys' videos, but I never came across what to say if the judge says, "If that's not you, you can't be here," in reference to it unless you're an attorney. I just wasn't ready for that one at all. I actually had a conversation with the first judge in the clerk's office, for I was told he is the head clerk. I'm not going into that here, but will tell you if you want to call me. I'm just so tired of typing, Crow. Below is my first-hand summary of the events. I first had to come before a glass window outside of courtroom, members of DA office, so they stated. I inquired to one there what this process was, such as a hearing process or arraignment. I could not get a straight answer on those questions, for he was repeatedly asking me my name and if I had an attorney. I ignored all that and kept to the script. I never authorized that name to be used in commerce. Is everyone back there sworn in? and I would like to see the indemnity bond for the charging instrument, and stated that I filed a motion to dismiss and challenged jurisdiction of which I filed weeks prior and had received no reply or ruling on. Some woman beside the guy in the window told him to just send me into the courtroom to see the judge. When my name was called, I waited and paused as everyone looked around, then stood up and repeated verbatim the Miller script. I am here regarding that matter. I never authorized the name you called to be used in commerce. Is everyone sworn in? The judge tried to get me to say I was John Doe, and I refused. He said something to the effect of, I know about you sovereign citizens. I cut him off, stating I am not that. I am a living man, and my status sui juris in pauperis. He said something to the effect of, yeah, free man on the land and all that stuff. I restated what I am and my status. He then badgered me with a barrage of questions kind of fast that I could not keep up with. For instance, do you have a driver's license, social security number, card, which I think I said no to, but I tried to get back on point. I am a living man. I had filled a motion of dismiss challenging jurisdiction and had not received a reply or ruling on that. He then went back to steadfast asking me, am I John Doe, of which I repeatedly said no. He then stated, if I am not, and if I was not an attorney, that I could not speak or be there for that matter. Before I could even say, are you forcing me to participate, he sent the bailiff in front of me, who repeatedly told me that I should stop speaking and leave, as the judge was still running his mouth in the background. The judge said something like, if John Doe wants to appear, the court can conduct its business. Out of frustration and seeing things were going south fast and fearfully, unfortunately, of contempt of charge or failure to appear, I said, that is impossible, Your Honor. The only John Doe I know is my deceased father, who died in 1995, because my legal name on my birth certificate is John Doe Jr., and with that, I was ushered out. I immediately went to the clerk of court and tried to file a notice of special appearance demand of proof of injury, in fact, and challenge to prove evidence of jurisdiction. This judge of the courtroom had already gotten word to the clerk of court to refuse any filings from me, for I was not John Doe. I have already filed successfully a motion of continuance signed John Doe Jr. I did the spelling on purpose, for I am associated through medical and official court documents with the name spelled that way. My motion to dismiss was spelled and signed as follows, John Doe Jr. I have been associated through medical records and court records with all the above names. I asked the clerk why she was refusing to accept a motion from me when two had already been filed and accepted previously. She would not answer, but I sensed she was troubled by this. I asked her name. She refused to give it. I asked if she was working under oath, and she said yes. I asked her if she was honoring her oath. She said yes. Then she told me to go to the head clerk of court, which turned out to be the sociopathic judge that had just railroaded me. Long story short, I went back after lunch, now a different judge, and they made sure to drag me to 4:30 when everyone else in the room was gone. When the name was called, I stalled for a moment, then stood and said, I am here regarding that matter. Before I could get anything else out, he said, Mr. John Doe, you are charged with blah, blah, blah. Are you seeking an attorney? I said, no. Then he said something, not sure what. Then the DA spit out another court date, and that was that. They tried to get me to sign a waiver. I refused, and I left, so the real court where this might work is next, I guess.
All right. I'm going to add a couple things, but first I'm going to say, proud to know you. That took some guts to stand up and implement the rights of a living human being. But if I am not mistaken, you open up by saying, if you're not John Doe or you're not his attorney, you can't speak. If I remember correctly from the episodes we did, you are in fact the administrator of that fictitious legal name. And by stating that you are the administrator, you take control. I'm not 100% sure about that, but you have two people, both Stephen and Alphonse, and for that matter, we could probably contact Clint to confirm whether what I just told you is accurate or not, but I think it might help solve part of your problem. Is there anything you want to add here, Jason? That is a heck of a story, and I'm proud to know people are standing up and trying to demand better of a basically commerce-based system. Even at one point in there, the judge says to conduct business here.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I got that. It seems like a piece of the puzzle was missing somewhere, that maybe there was something he needed to say to flip the courts, as Alphonse was saying, but I'm not entirely certain. I'd have to review all that material because it seems like the judges are, at least some of them are, getting wise to these procedures, and they're going to try and trip you up. So I think there's probably more studying and preparation you'd have to do to go into one of these situations. Also, I think if you came in way more confident and not looking like you're intimidated by them, which he kind of gave the impression he did get after a little while, they probably are going to be way more on the attack because they don't think that you know what to do.
Yeah, I agree with all that, Jason. And hopefully Stephen and or Alphonse and or Clint will catch this episode, which I will post for membership only, and chime in and maybe help get things a bit more tightly on track. I'm putting out a call here to people in the know. This gentleman has stood up alone, walked into the lion's den, and he has to go back. So any help we can get from people who absolutely know what to do and how to do it, please chime in here, and maybe I'll even connect you via email. I wanted to get that account in, put out a call for help, and demonstrate that this is one of, I don't even know how many emails of people who have implemented the ideas expressed in the law series in one way, shape, or form. And actually, I've had a number of success cases. Last night or the night before, someone in Australia was having problem with their parents getting their retirement checks, believe it or not, and implemented these ideas, and the statement made there was a check was written within 5 minutes. So there's all that. Anyhow, we are going to jump back in on number 58 of the Q&A session that will go over 100. Let's do it, Jason.
Are you familiar with the book The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe? In it, the authors outline the cycles of time relating world events to the generational values and behaviors, and human consciousness influences generational cycles in a repeating pattern. After reading it, I thought, according to their theories, the events of 9/11 mark a catastrophic shock to human consciousness that occurred a bit too early. What do you both think about the idea that 9/11 was like a railroad switch, precisely timed to divert humanity off its ascending spiral track and into a more controlled, flat repeating loop with no real connection to natural cycles or conscious evolution? Can enough of us wake up to jump the train back onto the natural track without derailing it? And might timing of such a jump be important?
All right, man, this is a fantastic question, and it gets to the root of timing is everything, which I accept. Nature shows us this. When it's time for something in nature to happen, it will happen without fail, proving that timing is everything. I'm not familiar with this book, but I'm thinking about putting it on my list here of books to get. The one issue I can see right out of the bat is when you go back through stated accepted history to try to compare events, we've demonstrated over and over that most of history is not acceptable. But that is not to say that the fabricated history isn't echoing the ups and downs. And as I've stated so many times, it appears in the eon cycle that I accept from the ancient Hindu tradition, all based in completions of 9, that we are in fact on the ascension again. Sometime around the year 2000, that began to be demonstrated by the number of people who are no longer, swallowing the baloney anymore. Timing is, in fact, everything. Here's the main problem that I see. What 9/11 did is lowered us all. It brought fear into the picture. And then artificial fear was going to be replicated over and over and over through news, through shootings, through media, basically. This world is covered with media, and the tone and tenor of what it is broadcasting, it is at a low animal level, which has an effect on us all, even if we're aware of it. It is a hard thing not to be affected by. Each of us can make the effort to do what I am trying to do, to lift your mind above it. But at the end of the day, we are all involved in an artificial cycle at this point. We do not have farms. We do not go out to grow our own food close to nature. What we in fact do is participate in a system based on fake fiat currency, based on fake imaginary laws, based on legal fictions, based on any number of things, so that we can have what we call currency to buy food, which is corporatized at this point. You can see where I'm going here. So yes, we can lift up, but the real challenge is going to be, can we bring the system to heal? In the forum over at Crow 777 Radio, the main forum, not the one under the episodes, there is an Equinox thread. Ivari has put some pretty interesting work along with S. Frog and others, but he rightly pointed out that we have many cycles, and this gets back to the question about timing in this question. Timing is critically important. In the smallest cycle that I think about a day. So the polarity of a day is nighttime, the negative side of the polarity, and daytime, the positive cycle. This is the mini cycle. If we blow this open to solstices, from the time we pass Christmas time or the winter solstice, we begin to get into the positive polarity all the way up to midsummer or the summer solstice. When we cross that point, we get back into the negative cycle. These mini cycles reflect the reality of eons, or many thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So just to make sure I got it all, timing is everything. And understanding how nature works, in fact, lets you know when you have a better chance of succeeding at any endeavor. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
So I definitely think that the 9/11 incident was a switch of sorts, because it certainly did push general human consciousness in a different direction. What I would like to point out, in addition to the way you were describing things, is that not only are we participating in a system today, there's so much distraction that you don't even realize, or give a crap really, most people I'm referring to, that you're participating in something that's actually incredibly destructive. Let's use the example of, let's say, the American Revolution time, where most people were agrarian, and those who did live in the city and businesses still had direct dealings with the agrarian side of things. When things went in a way they didn't like, for instance, different taxes and things like that, they were immediately aware of it and got pissed off about it. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. They weren't distracted by all the crazy sports and technology and entertainment programs and all that like everyone is today. So they had more direct dealings with their everyday today business that they cared about for the most part. So there's my take on that.
Yeah, and just to close this out, back in the day, Jason's speaking of, they didn't have fluoride. They didn't have corporatized food with any number of things that will affect consciousness. They didn't have all the frequencies in the air, which also can affect consciousness and the vibrational rate of a human being. But anyhow, let's keep moving, Jason.
Next from Aaron. Can you share with us any events that you feel comfortably did happen, ones that weren't staged, that had a far-reaching impact on society? As one who has experienced real tragedy, I find it so hard to accept in a wholesale fashion that evil does not exist, that men aren't capable of doing horrible things to their fellow man, and that everything is encoded and faked for some other purpose. Thank you for helping me through this.
All right, Aaron, let's cut to the chase here. Yeah, bad things happen, but the truth can be logically worked out by any human being. It helps if you've lived as long as I have, because I can compare the 70s as an example, and I can ask a simple question like, well, why didn't terrorism exist in the 70s in the way we're being told it does now? That was invented, by the way, in 79 for the most part. PLO is at the base of that story, or part of the base of that story. I can ask endlessly, in a country that's had access to guns all this time, why do we have school shootings now? And why didn't we then? But that's not really the main tell. This is the main tell. If we live in a society made up of human beings, and there are so many who just need to pick up a gun and kill, how can we exist? How could we ever have existed if that is the nature of a human being? And in truth, what we find when we go out in the world and we ignore what the news is telling us and we ignore what the media is pushing is that we find people just like ourselves. People who want to make a living, have a better life for their children, who would probably stop and help someone in need on the street. For the vast majority, that is what I see. So the main question here is not to try to determine, is this real or is this fake all the time, but understand the platform. If it's coming from national news or international news, your mind should not be open or exposed to that nonsense. We have proven outright what these mediums are for. They're to sway the way you think. They're to lower your vibrational rate. See, if you begin to understand that so many of the, as an example, fake gun violence things were staged, it tells you one thing immediately about this world, that it is infinitely more peaceful than you ever imagined. And at that point, you do not need to try to break down, do people get shot? I'll cut to the chase. Yeah, people get shot every day, just not in near the numbers you're being convinced they do. And what that tends to do is make a population of lower mindedness, of lower vibration that is in fear of its fellow man. And that is effing, pardon my French, ridiculous. There's my take on it.
And as far as things in the past, obviously you can't do a lot about investigating them directly. But when an incident happens today, the best thing to do is see if there's any holes in the story. Are there holes in the story? If there are, well, there's your answer right there. There's some kind of staged fakery going on, if that's what you need, some kind of peace of mind. Because, yes, of course, people do bad things. I have experienced things from people who are definitely not the nicest people in the world.
You know, Jason, there was an old meme that was passed around which really sums up a good allegory for this question. It was a picture that was being circulated on the internet, and it showed Barney Fife from the Andy Griffith Show on one side, and then it showed a modern police officer looking like a paramilitary SWAT ninja. And it asked a simple question: how did we go from Barney Fife to this? There is your logical, deductive reasoning example of what's gone on. And you can put together why. Because we're headed for an attempted police state. It's where this is going. This is where this is going. They cannot force everyone to get in line. But if they put this police state and this kind of censorship-driven existence into reality, their chances of controlling us all become infinitely more possible, at which point getting out of it becomes a much more difficult task.
Next, we have Olivia. What has really brought us to the chaotic state we find ourselves in, and what is our responsibility to move out of this to peace and mindfulness? Can we not look at broadcasting seeds that will bring hope, alleviate fear, and depression? Can we look at who we can restore our families, look at what happened to our households, and how can we give our children the best we can for their futures? What can we actually do to bring about healing to the many broken hearts brought about by the many divisive methods used against us? Can we spend time talking about solutions?
Man, there's so much here, Olivia, in these questions, and I guess this is what I can add. Yeah, there's things we can do, but it comes down to the individual, which is what this podcast is wholly about. It's the idea that if you can lift your mind up and respect all living things and respect your fellow man or fellow woman, you become a light. And if you do a good job of becoming a light, it will affect others around you. Whenever you walk into a room and everyone is angry, you can feel the negative dark cloud. But by contrast, and I experienced it the other day, I walked into a coffee shop, said howdy to the guy behind the counter, and he just beamed and glowed with a smile, and he said, "I'm living the dream." There he was, working behind a coffee counter. He was living the dream. The whole room was lifted by his outward expanse of positive energy. This is what we can do, but more so, because you include children and families in this, we need to get to a point where we instill that media is what media is, and it's not here to help you, and it has an agenda, and that news is no longer news and probably hasn't been in my lifetime, and that we do not judge the world based on this false reporting and these ideas of violence. What we judge the world on is how we interact in a day with other human beings, and I guess that's what I can add. And in terms of broadcasting seeds, yeah, in a way, that's the exact opposite of doing what's causing all this, because broadcasting in general is a prime mover in the negative, low vibrational state we find ourselves in, or the attempted low vibrational seeds. And I will state lastly, before I kick it back to Jason, that getting back to nature, the true foundations of things, help to show people the way to a truer reality that is not driven by fear and violence and lies and all these types of things.
Well, in my opinion, I think that the easiest way to deal with things is on a local level. And I've been saying similar things to this for a very long time. If you're truly alone and you really have nobody in your immediate vicinity, that does kind of suck, and you're going to have to reach out probably through social media or something like that to try and find like-minded individuals. However, if you can get together even with just one other person and then try and enlighten those around you in some way, shape, or form, that's the way to do it. It's through building community on a local level. And I've had an idea for several years now that I have not been able to implement through my musical side, where I would love to go on tour with a band and maybe play house shows more so than clubs or bars. And the idea is not only you coming to see performers play, but it's a meeting of the minds of like-minded individuals and help to build a community in every place that I would go to. I think that's the way to do it. Next up, can we explore the etymology of the words believe and knowledge? A very interesting study starting with the Greek.
Yes. Everyone should do these things. Words have meaning. We say it all the time here. Etymology is a more definitive way to get to the base of things before you start hitting dictionaries. And as we pointed out, it's good to know more than one dictionary. In other words, the English Oxford, the standard English dictionary, is a good place to go after etymology. And then after that, you might as well balance it out of Black's Law Dictionary, just so you understand what the people who think they're in charge of this place are thinking a word means. But I would further point out, when you get into etymology, you may not start with Greek. A word can have etymology anywhere. Go ahead, Jason.
Next time you approach an intersection and the light turns green, so we exercise trust and belief, is it safe to proceed, or do we actually know before entering the intersection?
This is an interesting way of putting a question that I've thought about for many years. This is my view on it. Just because the light turns green, it's not safe to go into the intersection. What the light does is tells you it's time to start paying attention because you're intending to go through the intersection. When a light turns green for me, I use my own consciousness and my own abilities to scan around to be certain, because I'm not going to let an automated light tell me that I can put my vehicle in the path of other vehicles just because it turned green. I think that's the gist of what you're asking. In other words, my own consciousness dictates when it's time to move.
Absolutely. Just because the bell rings doesn't mean you jump. So when the light turns green, look around first. It's all about awareness, and I'm not speaking specifically just to the stoplight situation. With anything, before you move, take a moment to be aware of what you're doing first.
There's the difference between an animal and a human being, as demonstrated in Jason's bell use. Pavlov's dogs, they ring the bell, the dogs salivate. The dogs cannot not salivate, but guess what? A human being can. You can train a human being in the same way as a dog, but apparently human beings do have the conscious ability to resist the programming of the bell if they choose to do so.
Next up is from Purr. The Truman Show was kind of an eye-opener to me, in many ways regarding who I am and my ego. Why would Hollywood allow such a film to be produced and distributed?
Well, I guess the easy answer is, we tried to show those stupid monkeys, but the stupid monkeys are so stupid, they're never going to understand what we just showed them. That could be part of it. Often that is part of it. But I would also point out that just because it comes from Hollywood, there's other human beings there. For all you know, the people involved in writing the script for this show were intentionally trying to talk about a problem they wish they could talk about openly. You just don't know. But the fact remains is that human consciousness can derive what the Truman Show is about. And in some ways, it is a pre-echoing. And I don't have many good things to say about Hollywood, but nonetheless, it's mostly human beings there, and most of those human beings are not at the top echelon of what people like to call evil or bad. At the end of the day, I think the main importance of something like The Truman Show is to recognize that this is a tale, an allegory being shown you. How can you use it? How can you dissect it to realize something meaningful about true existence? Jason?
Absolutely. Learn from everything, and every now and then something good, I say good, but something that can teach you and really open your mind comes out. Great example, Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. That should teach you a lot. Next up, Scary Gary 777. Frank Herbert said it best in his book, God Emperor of Dune. The wise man observed that wealth is a tool of freedom, but the pursuit of wealth is the way to slavery. Do you both typically stick to older texts for research material, or do you also delve into science fiction books from time to time?
Well, as fate would have it, you just quoted one of the most important sci-fi books I think that I have ever read. It is certainly among the top few, anyhow. In my view, Dune is an exact one-to-one allegory for the life we live, framed in a sci-fi manner. And it has a lot of things to say. How often have I talked about the Butlerian Jihad? This was written in the 50s, I think, if I remember correctly. How the hell could Frank Herbert have understood anything about computers in the modern age all the way back then? But this is another prime example. What I find, particularly with sci-fi, is anything that became a pillar of the book community and was recognized and stood the test of time. There are things you can probably derive from those texts, but I'll say it flat out. Everyone should read Dune. In the same way I recommended Marcus Aurelius or the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, on the other side of the coin is sci-fi. Frank Herbert's series of Dune, at least the ones written by Frank Herbert Sr., everyone should read those and understand what's being allegorized.
I think there's a lot of good to be had from fiction and science fiction, most especially older stuff, the people who are laying down the groundwork, because they didn't have as much to lean on like today's authors do. The old Star Trek, the original from the 60s, used to inject a lot of interesting concepts because a lot of good writers were contributing to that. So there's a lot of very interesting, eye-opening, awakening kind of concepts melded into the silliness of the science fiction template that they have to write into. So yes, definitely. I think there's a lot to be had from those.
Well, I'll point out one more thing. I always talk about getting text before the modern edit. And the reason I say that is we live in a legalistic society. And what you will find is that when people label their writings as fiction or a novel, then all of a sudden the door opens for them to say truthful things that they couldn't in a what is called a factual book. And an example of this, although I take issue with it all day long, is the Paul McCartney book, Billy's Back. Over and over they say in that stupid book, well, this is fiction, so we can tell the truth. That's how you know we're telling the truth. If this wasn't fiction, we couldn't tell you the truth. In other words, a nonfiction book has to lie to you because of the legal standard of our time, and a fiction book can tell you the truth all day long. And that is kind of a poor example because, in my view, much of that book is programming, but it does demonstrate that sci-fi does allow an avenue for someone to talk about things that they may not talk about in a nonfiction book anyhow.
Second question from Scary Gary 777. Do you think libraries will be removed eventually? I think they are a valuable source to feed the public propaganda. In my view, 91.1% of the books in libraries are propaganda, fake history, etc. Don't get me wrong, the right books are extremely valuable, but most books are, unfortunately, time-wasting material.
I see your point here, but yeah, I absolutely think libraries are going to go away. And I think what's actually going to happen, and look at the thumbnail of this episode. In the same way, in 2013, I wrote the About page talking about the coming end of free speech for the website. In the episode image for this, I'm telling everyone, go collect old books now. The reason for that is we're quickly coming to a time when all information is going to be passed digitally. Anything digital can be manipulated or changed with the push of a button. That's not so easy to do with a printed book. And I know there's going to be a ton of people who start shouting CERN and they can change reality. And I'm just going to set that aside for this conversation. I've spent my life dependent on books. And when you get back to things like, as an example, a book I've been talking about lately, Marcus Aurelius. First of all, I don't know if Marcus Aurelius existed as a true supposed Caesar in a Roman Empire. I take issue with much of that history. But nonetheless, the words that are in that book matter to me because the ideas are clearly reflecting almost a Eastern monk ascetic of care about all living things, and yet this is supposedly coming from a man who is a Caesar of Rome. Here's the short answer. In my view, libraries will become extinct at some point, or at least restricted to a few. The other point I would make is anyone, in the same way, if I would have known in 1965 to buy a Camaro and a Mustang and just keep it the way it is till now, I would have made a whole lot of money. So I'll equate that with value, even though it's really not. Books right now are that. If you get your hands on books that matter, old books before the modern edit, those things will be priceless in the years to come, from my point of view. Jason?
Well, who knows if they'll completely phase them out, but I think what they will do is keep streamlining them towards the digital, because that's what you see with new libraries today. For instance, there's one that got built only in the last few years here in Baton Rouge, and of course there are a lot of books there, but there's also a very substantial digital section, and I think they'll just keep moving in that direction because, as you said, they could change digital at the push of a button as opposed to the printed word.
Let's use archive.org, Jason. Archive.org was a fantastic resource, which is already starting to suffer from censorship. This is what we find. On archive.org, there are texts that we can't really find to order in print anywhere. Part of that is because Google bots went into university libraries and scanned these things. But here's what's happening. You find an old text that you want, you click on it and said, this has already been checked out. Sign up and get on a waiting list. Give me a damn break. That is a digital file. You can replicate that thing to the end of time, and yet we see the control mechanisms put on it. This is where our information world is headed. And those are in print, real books right now that Google took their bots in. And it's a bizarre thing at the end of the day, because Google is recognizing there's probably a copyright from somewhere in this world, and yet what they've done is scanned it digitally and put controls on its availability. So I'll just add that little bit.
Next, 3 questions from David. First is, have you tried to contact a current or former employee in the satellite, cell phone, or television industry for an interview. Well, that's what Tom was.
Right, that's what Tom was. And I think mostly what happens on this show is we cover so much is that people from the industries end up contacting us. And if I'm not mistaken, Jason, someone in this field contacted us recently, did they not?
Yeah, we have people that reach out to us from various industries and kind of give us suggestions about things or insider information, I guess you could call it.
Right, and part of the problem here, I had an email last night from an avid follower of this show. Let me pick my words carefully, because identifying people who are trying to support a family and hold down a job, this is a dangerous damn world. He's in a position where this fake nonsense violence drills are going on. He's aware what it's all about, yet he's stuck in a position where if he even lets on for a second that he doesn't accept it, he loses his livelihood and brings his family at risk. So part of the problem here is some of these topics, yeah, we get contacted by people, but so often I can't figure out a way to come on for 2 hours without leaving a breadcrumb trail that other people who want to cause trouble for them could figure out. And as a matter of fact, that happened in the PR Newswire episode we did. Nothing bad has come of it, but just in order to talk about it, it's pretty clear that anyone who wanted to come in with a shovel could uncover a path to follow to cause trouble. So there's all that, Jason.
But we absolutely want to hear from you if you've got something interesting to tell us from any of these industries that are part of the control mechanism.
And I will point out, safety is our concern here. And I don't mean safety from physical violence. I mean from being affected in the way you're trying to make a living. That is always paramount on my mind. In the same way I opened up this episode with an individual who had the guts to walk naked basically into the lion's den and try to stand up for his human rights. There is never a time when people contact us when I am not doing everything humanly possible to protect their identity or what they might want to talk about. So there's all that, Jason.
Next question, how about pilots that have flown to or over the Antarctic or anyone who has been there by ship?
This is a tough thing because this is a controlled area, isn't it? And we do have accounts that are published in the record, but what are they worth? We all suspect that everything we've been told about Antarctica is untrue, but in the spirit of this question, I'll put out a call. If anyone has been in a position where they've been to the Antarctic via ship or on an aircraft and would like to talk with me, and believe me, your security is paramount before anything ever even gets planned for recording, contact Jason or I.
And the last one. How do you think Google Earth get their photos?
It's pretty simple. Go online and look up high-altitude aircraft images from roughly 70,000 feet. You'll see that they're interchangeable with what we're shown as having come from the ISS. It's high, and not only that, I've said many times, all those years of filming through my telescope, there's little black round things that people film all the time. I filmed it endlessly. Other people finally came around doing what I was doing, and they're filming it all the time. There's these little black, what I call human technology up there. Lord knows what they're doing. Would not surprise me to find out that they're transmitting images back.
Next questions are from Gina. Help me understand Saturn. How is it satanic in nature? Who first decided the imagery was evil? If the sun is electric and the moon is magnetic, Saturn must give off an evil vibe for or to be associated with Satanism. Am I correct on this?
Gina, you're partly correct in this. This is how I understand it. And Gina, there are, in the Light of Egypt, which I've referenced many times, they reference an astrology dictionary, which is one of the accepted definitions of all these things that you're bringing up from an astrological standpoint that precede the modern edit. Also, there is a book you can buy by a guy named Manilius, which is supposedly the oldest astrological observations, but he is apparently in that book referencing people far before his time, supposed Ptolemy and others. Here's how I accept that it works. In our current age, we have been made low. And when we are low and in need of correction as a human race, Saturn is nothing but a cruel taskmaster. To put this into perspective, in a supposed golden age, when everybody is higher minded and they claim even that our bodies were less 3D material, I don't know what to make of all that, there would be nothing bad about Saturn. And this demonstrates the duality ideas of our world. In the same way that everything that we can point at has negative, that is not the entire truth about that thing we're pointing at, right? So To cut to the chase here, where we find ourselves trying to crawl out of the pit and ascend again, everything about Saturn is going to be a cruel taskmaster right now. And it's also going to define things like time or the Grim Reaper, all these things associated with it. But let's suppose we go forward many eons and we've crawled up to a much higher level. At that point, then Saturn, there's nothing bad about it. So I hope that answers in some way that's meaningful to you. And if you do look up the sources I showed you, it will help you get down the road a little further.
You can also look up easy things like the death cults, all that kind of nonsense. They call them the Saturnalian Brotherhood for a very good reason. Even in ancient Rome, they had the events of Saturnalia and all that, which was about chaos. So
right.
There's references all over the place. Next, do Santo Spinachi's teachings, in your view, correspond to the truth in what Christ really is?
You know, I hate getting painted in a corner like this because I'm put in a position where people who respect what I say are asking me to say something about another human being, and I don't like being put in that position. So here's what I'm going to say. I have truly appreciated much of the language-based stuff that Santos did. There's a bunch of stuff that is not my cup of tea. That is all that I will say. But I have referenced The Devil's Pulpit, the book, a number of times, and even just these episodes. They will answer the question you are asking. And truly, all these old texts that we have, there are levels of meaning, and they all go back to the sky clock, and they all go back to nature. I hope that answers in some way that you can understand.
I also have really respected Santo Spinachi's work. I've interviewed him myself a few years ago. The only thing I can tell you is that something seemed to change with the way he releases information to the public in the past few years. And I don't like speaking ill of people. I still like him, but something definitely changed, and I'm not exactly sure what it is.
Yeah, there's another question like this coming that we're going to have to face. You're never going to catch me on this show bad-mouthing people, and if it's happened in the past, then I don't care who they are, they're owed an apology. For my part, right now, a lot of it's just not my cup of tea, but that is not a slight on a human being.
Next questions are from Anthony. What is your opinion on Reginald Denny? Was this real or was this staged? I know that Rodney King was staged. What is your take on Phil Hartman? Was this a staged death or was it real?
You know, if you want to just apply common sense, you know the source of all this stuff, so what value does it have for a person to waste their mind on them? In my view, these are all nonsensical things.
How about Phil Hartman? What do you think of him?
Phil Hartman was another fake death from Hollywood, wasn't it? It fits the template of everything else we've seen. You know, they've got to have their death. They've got to have their violence. They've got to demonstrate that even the best paid among us and the most privileged among us, man, you could die at any moment. And by the way, don't even ask if we're living longer than you are, because look, poor Phil Hartman died in his 40s or whatever it was.
Right. What about Michael Jordan's father's death?
Not accepting it.
Was it a hoax? I would say that you think so.
Yeah, in my view, I'm not accepting it. I have no reason or no place in my mind for this kind of violent nonsense. What I'm more interested in is what's real, what nature is teaching me, how I can lift up out of these types of ideas: death, 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 gun, 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 suicide, suicide, beating, beating. I have no space in my mind for that nonsense. And even if we could possibly dig up one that had a modicum of truth in it, it has no business trying to infringe on the overall reality of my day. And that's exactly what media does with this. So let's say that we have a whole country, and let's imagine that there are 300 million of us. And all of a sudden on this day, all 300 million of us are barraged with this media report of this horrible natural or not natural violence that occurred. Immediately, the overall aspect of that entire day for 300 million people has been unfairly weighted by this ugliness, which actually makes up less than 1% of anything that anyone could attribute importance to. And I know I kind of stumble on my words, as my point is if you take 300 million people and take one minuscule event, even if it was wholly true, and blow it up to the rate that they do, it is becoming freakishly monstrous in its attribution. I guess that's what I'll say.
Don't forget that they'll use any event to their advantage. Human beings die, whether you're famous or not, and you never know whether it's someone passes away, like Burt Reynolds supposedly died of a cardiac arrest yesterday. Okay, that's extremely likely. He was 82. But are they going to use it to skew something in some direction if it suits their means? Sure.
Well, even just the event itself, Jason. So there's one guy out of a whole world population, and yet the importance of that death is going to become paramount to the news cycle, blowing it out of proportion, warping your mind to these negative, unhelpful things that they are going to echo and re-echo and echo again. And not only that, they're going to attach someone like Burt Reynolds to your nostalgia. Because who doesn't love Smokey and the Bandit? Who doesn't love any number of things Burt Reynolds did? It's a perversion. It's a perversion of information transference. That's what it is.
Well, celebrity is always going to be used against us, whether it's an event that really happened or not. They use these people, whether they're meaning to be decent human beings or not, they're always going to use it as a weapon against you. That's what they're there for.
Celebrity is owned and operated, and it's here to do what it's here to do. And you don't get any level up the ladder without signing on the dotted line. That's my point of view.
Next part of this question, was Gaddafi a Freemason? Was his death a hoax, or was he really for his people?
You know, this is another one of those things. To get up to that level in the modern era, is it possible to be free of all the just kind of pig in mud that we see from leadership at that level? Jason and I did an episode where we showed that there was no central bank there in Gaddafi's lifetime, and that their economy was good, and that after he went, the reverse of that is becoming true. I think these are more important things to focus on than whether he was a Freemason. That's my point of view.
Right. And while we can't prove anything of these places that we've never been to and very likely will never go to, just look at the fruits of someone's labor, what was really going on there, and then you can judge for yourself what the truth may be. I also would suggest don't believe anything that the United States media tells you. Even if you just look at other media around the world, you can see stark contrasts. That's not to say that they're telling you the truth either, but you could look at the same situation from multiple points of view from different countries, and you're going to see very different reporting going on. So, viewer, be warned.
So let me ask a reverse question here. So suppose I wrote a book tomorrow that was going to be a true historical account of your life. So I go do all this research on your life, but within the scope of that book, I do things like have a scene of what happened with you at breakfast table one day, or one day at a job you had somewhere where there was an important moment. Would there be a single word of what I wrote that reflects the true reality of the life you lived? That puts in perspective what we're talking about. There is likely not a syllable in the death of Gaddafi that reflects whatever it is that actually happened there. And the sooner we come to understand these things, the sooner any of this celebrity nonsense will leave importance in our existence.
A great example would be, even if you believe the absolute mainstream history on Adolf Hitler, there are still pictures of him being kind to his dogs. So people are complex no matter what they may or may not have done. Next part of this question, what is your take on celebrities having to sacrifice someone they care about? Bill Cosby's son, Michael Jordan's father, Bruno Mars's mother, etc.
It's all just freakish nonsense, and I don't accept that death is actually occurring in this way. And the reason for that is because our minds make this reality. So if everyone believes the death happened, then mentally you have the sacrifice you needed. But all the rest of it is just nonsense in my ears. I will not be swayed to think about death or accept death in the ways that are being pushed in this manner.
Well, again, I'm going to say, people do die, obviously, but no matter what the reality of the situation is, the media is always going to use it for whatever spin they want. And the last one, was Hugo Chavez an actor on the world stage too? Was he doing good for the people?
At this point, you don't get to the level without being incorporated into what's gone on. And I use the word incorporated for a reason, to demonstrate what we're talking about. You can go back and even see older accounts of maybe the supposed pirates' days, or when the tall ships were on the sea, and just see how places like Spain and England forced anyone in any position of power to be subject to their rule. So how is it that we get up to a time where Hugo Chavez is here and somehow he's escaped all that? And by the way, he controls a whole country. It's all a rigged game, man. That's all there is to it. The artificial system that drives this world and has separated us so far from the natural world has been controlled for hundreds of years before our current lifetime, I would estimate.
Next questions are from Terrence. I am in Seattle. I have seen the moon in the sky in the early morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, and late evening on the same day, with repeated observations of such for a number of days straight. The last time I observed this phenomenon was before the partial eclipse in August of 2017. A massive fog bank moved in several minutes prior to the eclipse.
Yeah, that's the chemtrails, right? That's the chemtrails that got reported, them trying to block it.
This year, when keeping an eye out this summer, the skies were more often overly littered with chemtrails, dispersed chemtrails, and a lingering smoky haze from forest fires nowhere near Seattle. There were no gales or light winds during this period. But come late autumn and winter, as there will be plenty of gales, as well as an ongoing onslaught of precipitation, albeit slowly or exponentially.
You know, when I guess I break down the overall gist of what you're doing, what you're saying is I'm observing a thing and it doesn't seem to be correct. Part of the problem with the moon will always be part of the problem with the moon. There are so many different cycles we could talk about related to the moon, and until you truly understand the astronomy university level ideas behind it, you can't hope to start to break down what's correct or what's not correct, and it is severely complex. But when you begin to understand what is accepted about the moon and you begin to understand that it's not correct, you will understand things like what I said during the eclipse you just referenced. The moon played no role in that solar eclipse. So in short, to cut to the chase here, yeah, man, they chemtrailed all over this country. I had reports from everywhere on the day of eclipse that chemtrails were blocking the scene, and the people who did have a shot and overexposed the eclipse itself saw a second body mirroring the eclipse just to the right and a little bit above the actual eclipse. Yeah, there's something going on here, and every effort is made to cover it up.
I have observed in the past otherwise stationary stars move along a trajectory and then fade out. I am cognizant of technologies and companies that can create man-made star shows, but I would not rule out what I have seen as something other than mentioned. Any thoughts on this?
If I understand what you're asking, my wife and I see this any single night we go out here in Rhode Island to observe. We will see a slowly wandering point of light that is usually pretty bright, and then as soon as we begin watching it, without too much more time elapsing, it dims out. We see this night after night, and I am truly looking forward to the point when I can manage getting my massive scope out again and I'm fully recovered from the surgery I just had, because I want nothing more than to get my full spectrum camera on my telescope and track one of these things. I hope that's what you were alluding to.
Now, you can look on YouTube, and there are plenty of people doing astrophotography and astrovideography, and they're finding things that don't correlate to the mainstream astronomical releases. I think that's pretty fair, right, Crow?
Yeah, spend a week filming the sky, and I guarantee you'll find something that mainstream can only lie about. All right, man. So that is the first hour of 2 of the remaining questions from subscribers for episode 124.5. And again, just to remind everyone, Sunday nights, 6 p.m. in the evening, Eastern Standard Time or New York time, I have a new radio show called Crow 777 Live on Truth Frequency Radio. And we base a lot of the show on what's going on in the live chat. So there it is, man. Hope to see you all over at crow777radio.com for the second hour of this episode. Cheers.